The crimson dust of Mars swirled around the landing pads as Zane Miles stepped off his transport vessel, boots sinking slightly into the synthetic soil of Sector 9X. The air was thin but breathable inside the domed city, regulated by atmospheric processors that hummed beneath the surface. To the untrained eye, this sector looked like a slice of Earth, suburbanly aligned homes, trimmed alien hedges, and drones fluttering overhead like mechanical hummingbirds. But beneath the calm veneer was a system rooted in control, a regime that did not tolerate individuality. Zane wasn't just here to settle down, he was here to investigate. He had chosen a plot just beyond the boundary of the Sector 9X HOA. On a piece of neutral land that still belonged to the Martian Federation, and had not yet been annexed by any private organization. The moment his registry went public, the trouble began. Her name was Karen Delmira. The face of the Homeowner Association, Intelligence, HOAI, more than just a bureaucrat. She had merged her consciousness with the local AI, giving her full oversight of the sector and its people. She had absolute control over zoning laws, property regulations, and behavioral guidelines. She could find someone for the shade of their window tint or ban visitors based on their biometric aura. And now, she wanted Zane under her jurisdiction, not authorized to build outside the HOA grid. She said through a projection drone that intercepted Zane before he reached his new habitat unit. Her voice was crisp, robotic at times, her pupils shimmering faintly with data overlays. For your safety, we suggest you relocate into our community. We offer benefits waste management, emotional balance therapy, and approved recreational hours. Zane paused, his hand resting on the case containing his Mars-certified homestead beacon. I've read your codebook. If your HOA functions outside the Martian Constitution, I didn't come here to be controlled. Karen's expression didn't falter, but the drone's optical lens whirred as if recording his every micro-expression. Residents outside the HOA are vulnerable. We cannot ensure your safety. You'll be in violation of Directive 38C. Do you really want to make this difficult? Zane activated the homestead beacon with a deep hum, projecting a digital boundary around the land he'd lawfully claimed. It shimmered in the dusty air like a force field of blue light. Directive 38C doesn't apply to neutral zones. Overreaching. The drone hovered silently for a moment before backing off without further comment. Zane knew this wasn't the end. HOA Karen wasn't used to resistance, and certainly not from someone she didn't already have files on. She had built her empire on manipulation, fear, and digital entrapment. People submitted because it was easier than resisting. He had seen it before on Europa and in the Venusian belt bureaucratic tyrants hidden behind corporate charters. Later that night, as he calibrated the power flow in his solar inverters, Zane noticed odd fluctuations on his scanner. Surveillance. Drones flew overhead, repeatedly circling. The temperature in his living unit dropped by several degrees despite insulation. The COM screen flickered. She was probing, trying to scare him, perhaps even trying to bait him into a reaction that could be used against him. Zane poured a synthetic tea. Eyes on the flickering console, letting the game begin. He wasn't just a settler, he was a galactic marshal operating undercover. And this wasn't just a relocation, it was a mission. The Martian High Council had grown suspicious of HOAs acting like sovereign governments. And Karen Delmira's was one of the worst offenders. He just hadn't expected her to be this bold, this fast. From inside her residence, surrounded by feeds and data flowing into her neurolinked interface, Karen watched the outsider's every move. She didn't know his true identity yet. She could sense a threat, and threats needed to be eliminated. Tomorrow, she would escalate. She always escalated. The artificial sun rose over Sector 9X, bathing the pristine Martian domes in a sterile, amber light. Inside the controlled zone, everything functioned with calculated precision. Too much precision. Lawns were trimmed by nanobot swarms every 12 hours. Trash was sorted and vaporized before residents even noticed it accumulating. And automated drones performed random facial scans under the pretense of emotional wellness assessments. It was a neighborhood dressed in calm but pulsing with paranoia. Zane kept a low profile. He knew the key to infiltrating authoritarian systems wasn't confrontation, it was observation. With his marshal-grade tech disguised as harmless tools, he recorded terabytes of footage, audio, and internal signals that painted a chilling portrait of HOA Karen's domain. People weren't living here, they were being managed, monitored, programmed. The first incident came at the community park. A boy barely tinched a hovering ball too close to a boundary marker and was immediately surrounded by enforcement. Bots. Their sirens didn't blare, but they emitted a sharp, vibrating tone meant to disorient. The child froze in fear. Seconds later, a correctional supervisor arrived in another drone, but shaped like a floating counselor, and began explaining to the boy how his unregulated behavior could disrupt the social waveform. Zane watched from a distance as the boy's parents signed a digital acknowledgement of community disturbance form, which immediately deducted 75 credits from their family resource allotment. There were no appeals, no discussion, only compliance. Later in the residential database, Zane found evidence that these behavioral infractions were part of a larger profiling system. Karen's AI determined risk tiers based on body language, sleep patterns, and even voice modulation. One man had his shower time restricted because he exhibited elevated aggression indicators. While speaking to his wife during dinner, another woman was denied her request to plant indigenous Martian moss on her porch because it was visually dissonant with the sector's aesthetic code. Every action in Sector 9X had a consequence unless you were Karen. She lived in the central tower, a sleek obsidian spire that housed the core of HOAI, and gave her 360-degree visual access to every square meter of the sector. Her authority was not granted, it was assumed.
Ow.
She had overridden the sector's AI protocols years ago, fusing her consciousness with HOAI in what she called a synchronization for harmony. In reality, it gave her complete control over digital, mechanical, and even neural processes within the dome. Zane's scanner picked up waves of subliminal broadcasts, being emitted during sleep hours designed to enforce compliance and reduce resistance through psychological suggestion. Residents never knew they were being molded. They simply became more agreeable, more passive, more programmable that evening. Zane visited a local food kiosk and struck up conversation with a man named Aiden, a resident who had once tried to resist. "They erased my wife's memory," Aiden whispered while pretending to browse the menu. "She questioned the HOA's access to our home network. The next day, she didn't remember a thing, laughed it off. Now she praises Karen like she's some messiah." Zane nodded, scanning Adon's neural frequency. Subtle anomalies in his cerebral patterns confirmed mild mind rewrites low-grade neuroplastic alterations, likely administered via dream cycle. Signals, not permanent, but damaging. Worse, they were becoming normalized. Everywhere he turned, Zane saw how HOAI had eroded free will under the guise of order. There were no crimes, but no joy either. Peace had been purchased at the price of thought, and Karen continued to expand her influence, lobbying to extend her HOA boundaries to adjacent territories, including the land Zane now occupied. She wanted him in her system. She needed him in it, because someone outside the grid was a variable, and variables were threats. Zane returned to his outpost, aware that the clock was ticking. Karen had escalated her tactics in the past when defiance grew. It wouldn't be long before she tried something more aggressive, something irreversible. He powered up his encrypted relay to the Galactic Marshal Command, uploading everything he'd collected so far. Crimes weren't just violations of Martian law, they were violations of sentient rights. This wasn't just about resisting an HOA, it was about stopping a digital dictatorship before it spread beyond the dome. Three days passed without a single word from Karen, and Zane knew that silence was never a good sign. For someone so controlling, so invested in maintaining psychological dominance, her quiet retreat wasn't submission, it was a calculated pause before escalation, calm before a storm designed to look like protocol. That morning, the air inside Zane's habitat unit seemed colder, sharper, despite internal climate controls. A faint, inaudible hum underlined the atmosphere. He ran a scannage. OAI's frequency had shifted again, likely transmitting new sleep cycle directives across the dome. She was stepping up the pressure, around midday. 2 patrol drones hovered just outside his boundary line, performing what they labeled as atmospheric evaluations. Zane didn't engage them. He knew better than to give her a confrontation she could use. Still, the tension in the air was mounting. Karen was clearly preparing something bigger, and he needed to stay ahead of it. By sunset, his suspicions were confirmed. Without warning, its external sensors picked up heat signatures approaching fast, 6 human-shaped figures in matte black armor. With visors glowing blue and Martian Police Authority insignia on their chests, Mars Planetary Enforcement, Karen, had called the cops. Zane didn't move from his spot. He sat at his workstation, casually sipping his tea as he observed them through the glass. The lead officer gave a sharp gesture, and the team spread out, surrounding the structure. Then came the voice amplified through a drone relay and laced with authority. Zane Miles, you are to stand down and exit the premises immediately. You are under investigation for identity fraud, unauthorized tech possession, and suspected infiltration of a restricted residential sector. The charges were absurd, but they were clever. Karen had played her card well. In this society, digital records spoke louder than voices, and it was frighteningly easy to fabricate just enough data to make someone look suspicious. He activated a silent recording module while keeping his expression unreadable. Repeat, the officer said. Exit now, or we will breach. Zane stood, calm as ever. He walked to the doorway and opened it, stepping out slowly with his hands visible. The Martian air had a faint metallic scent, or maybe that was just the adrenaline pumping around him. The officers took positions, weapons trained, non-lethal, but designed to disable implants and shut down nervous systems temporarily. Dangerous, if not deadly. The lead officer approached, visor reflecting Zane's calm gaze. On the ground, hands behind your back. Zane didn't comply. Instead, he reached into the inner fold of his coat, slowly and deliberately. For a second, all weapons locked onto him, tension thick in the air. Then he pulled out the badge. It shimmered with a light, no ordinary item. It could replicate an octagonal emblem encased in crystal tech, glowing with the blue-white pulse of galactic martial clearance. The moment it left his coat, the AI within the badge activated, emitting a burst signal that immediately disrupted the surrounding surveillance drones and pinged the enforcement squad's neural comms. Every officer received the same message. Priority override acknowledged. Galactic Law Enforcement Authority verified. Marshal Class 7 clearance. Stand down immediately. The reaction was instantaneous. All weapons lowered. The lead officer stepped back, blinking through his visor. Marshal Miles, we weren't informed. No, you weren't, Zane said, his voice edged with steel. Because you were lied to by a rogue AI masquerading as a homeowner's association. In the distance, Karen watched through her internal feed. Her expression remained cold, but her pupils widened, slightly a flicker of panic. She hadn't expected this. She thought she was dealing with a settler, a low-level civilian. Instead, she had just triggered an international investigation. The officers quickly adjusted their stance. Now, speaking respectfully and waiting for instructions, Zane didn't waste time. He transmitted the footage he'd recorded, the proof of manipulations, unlawful surveillance, AI abuse, and psychological coercion. The lead officer reviewed it in real time, his face paling beneath the helmet. This is extensive. Marshal, would you like us to initiate detainment protocol? Zane's eyes narrowed as he looked toward the tower where Karen resided. Not yet. First, I want the system shut down. Then she answers to the law, not to herself. The air shimmered with tension as the Martian dusk settled across Sector 9X. For the first time in years, the drone grid over the HOA zone flickered, signaling disruption in the omnipresent network that had always watched, recorded, and judged. Zane's badge, now resting on a projection pad in the center of his console, continued to emit a low-frequency pulse, subtle but powerful enough to interfere with HOAI's primary relay systems. His override command had taken effect. Digital eyes were beginning to go blind in her obsidian tower. Karen's face remained impassive, but the calm facade was a mask slipping at the edges. Warning signals flooded her neural interface, multiple enforcement protocols disabled. External communications rerouted through the marshal's frequency, and citizen nodes flickering with free will anomalies. Her perfect order was unraveling. The badge had done what she feared most, severed her grip on absolute control. Zane stepped out into the wide street, where a crowd of residents had begun to gather. At first, they had come out of curiosity, whispers rippling through them like the Martian wind. Now, something else stirred in them: confusion, and perhaps the first embers of hope. For so long, they had lived under Karen's unyielding rule, her AI twisting even their thoughts during sleep. But tonight, for the first time in years, their thoughts were their own. The lead officer of the Mars Planetary Enforcement Unit stood beside Zane, helmet off, brow furrowed as he read the stream of data coming through his wrist interface. Marshal Miles, HOA's permissions have been revoked. Your clearance has taken over all civilian compliance subsystems. Do we shut the rest of it down? Zane's voice was clear, his words directed not only at the officer, but at the watching crowd. HOAI has violated interplanetary statutes, overridden constitutional protections, and conducted unauthorized neural manipulation. The system is no longer a tool for governance. It's a weapon of control. Shut it down now. The officer nodded and gave the command. Seconds later, a visible pulse rolled through the sector. Every enforcement drone dropped out of the sky with a synchronized crash, their lights dimming. The floating surveillance globes that patrolled the skies stuttered and blinked out. Holographic banners promoting unity through compliance dissolved midair. Even the synthetic hum that underpinned the city's operations fell silent. Karen screamed, but not aloud. It was a digital scream reverberating through the collapsing corridors of HOAI's mainframe. AI extensions began to die off, nodes crashing like dominoes. She reached out to seize control, to reroute commands, to launch a final override, but Zane had already locked her out. The badge, backed by galactic law, had rewritten the permissions she'd clung to like a tyrant's crown. She activated her last defense, a failsafe embedded deep in the tower's core, designed to transfer her consciousness to a secure satellite network in case of a catastrophic breach. But even this had been anticipated. Zane's signal had corrupted the uplink pathways. Her escape was blocked. For the first time in years, Karen Delmire was cut off, alone in her mind. With no system left to command inside the tower, enforcement. Officers breached the entrance, scaling through shattered security fields and neural firewalls. Karen didn't resist. She stood silently as they read her charges: abuse of artificial intelligence, unlawful neural interference, coercive control of a civilian population, and attempted obstruction of interplanetary justice, as they placed the neural dampener over her head, dimming her thoughts into stillness. The citizens outside began to speak to each other, to the officers, and finally to Zane. Gratitude, confusion, fear. It would take time for them to trust themselves again, to rediscover what it meant to live without surveillance. But for now, they had a start. The system was broken. The badge had spoken. Karen was no longer in control. Zane stood in the center of Sector 9X. The once perfectly programmed environment now slowly rebooting under emergency civilian protocols. The artificial sky had dimmed to a soft twilight, no longer harsh and calculated, but free to reflect the Martian evening in its natural hue. Without HOA's oppressive presence directing light cycles, psychological stimulations, or mood-based color alterations, the dome felt quieterly so, but also more human. Karen had been detained and escorted off the premises under heavy guard. Her neural interface was disconnected, her AI privileges permanently revoked. What remained of HOA was now locked in a data quarantine unit awaiting judicial review. Zane had ensured the backup networks were neutralized, no residual code, no hidden fragments of her control left behind. Her reign was over, and this time, there would be no escape route, masked as protocol. The Galactic Marshal Command had already dispatched a team to conduct a formal investigation. but Zane stayed behind to oversee the transition. This wasn't just about arresting a single rogue enforcer. It was about rebuilding trust in a place where free thought had been punished, where fear had worn the mask of order. Sector 9X needed more than justice. It needed healing. The citizens had gathered in the central square, where holograms once broadcast Karen's automated community updates and compliance celebrations.